You're listening to a fresh new podcast on healing, spiritual development, nutrition, energy work, and sometimes aliens. From the owner of the celebrity-acclaimed Raw Republic Juice Bar and Wellness Center in New Orleans, Louisiana, Sheena Manina. Yes, that's her real name. This is Raw Talk with Sheena.
Okay, so we have my friend Dr. Shari Taylor here today. Welcome, Shari.
Thank you.
So we first met, I'm going to give the audience kind of a background. We first met when you were teaching lucid dreaming at a yoga retreat. Do you remember that?
I do.
And it was so interesting to me that someone who I perceived you as just kind of having a traditional clinical practice. And so the fact that you were talking about something that was in my world a little bit more esoteric and out there, woo-woo, was very interesting to me because I'm always tuning into the way that traditional therapy is marrying with something that maybe can't be tested or defined. And I think that I knew by your just talking about that topic that you were kind of going in that direction. Mm-hmm. So since then, I kind of want the audience to get an idea of who you are and from what perspective you're coming from. Can you tell us just a little bit about where this journey in therapy began and how it's kind of evolved recently?
Sure. Probably 20 years ago, went to nursing school and, worked as a nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit for about a year, then went back to school and became a neonatal nurse practitioner and worked in that field for about 8 years. And loved it, but it's quite intense and, stressful, which I think when you're young, you can, I don't know, I sort of liked that adrenaline rush. But then as I got older, I sort of wanted a more, I had kids and I just wanted kind of regular Monday through Friday hours. And so I'd always had an interest in psychology. So I went back to school and got my nurse practitioner degree, kind of specialty in psychiatry, working with children. And typically, nurse practitioners, sort of like psychiatrists, focus on the psychopharmacology aspect. So there's just a lot of prescribing of antidepressants and medicine for anxiety and these kinds of things. And I wanted more training in the psychotherapy aspect. So I got my PhD in psychology and tried to combine the psychopharmacology with psychotherapy and did that for a while. But I became a little frustrated by it in the way that it seemed not just, I think a lot of the antidepressants and the medicines that are out there for anxiety and depression and different mental health issues, there's a place for them and they are really helpful in a lot of circumstances, but they're often just kind of used as a Band-Aid and getting to the core issue, which is really sort of what is necessary to do some, to have some personal development. That's not really done so much. And there, I think, becomes kind of a dependence on the medicines. Mm-hmm. And
what do most antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications do physiologically?
They work on some neurotransmitters in the brain. Different ones work on, different neurotransmitters, but typically serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, and these, by increasing the availability or the amount of these neurotransmitters that are available in the brain, can help people sort of manage their, help with daily functioning, especially, if depression and anxiety is really affecting the way that you interact with people and the way mm-hmm. that you live your life. These medicines can help with that, but they also can sort of have a numbing effect a little bit. And, there's a lot of side effects with them and they have to, most people take them for years, and you have to take them every day. And so I sort of, just through kind of personal experiences of going through some difficult times in my life, and then I was introduced to yoga, which really helped, and then through that, meditation, and that sort of became a major interest of mine. I went on a Vipassana retreat, which is a 10-day silent retreat, and where you just meditate about 15 hours a day. And
I've done that.
You've done that
in Massachusetts.
Yeah, that changed my life, and I just became very interested in that, and the way that all of that kind of morphed into this interest in psychedelics and altered states was I actually watched the documentary The Spirit Molecule. Have you ever seen that?
No.
It's a documentary that Rick Strassman, who's a psychiatrist, many years ago, he did a study on DMT, and it's called The Spirit Molecule. Which
So
is like
for those who are
ayahuasca.
not interested or not aware, DMT is the effective compound in what is known, I guess, most prevalently known through ayahuasca, and which other? Some other psychedelics as well.
Yeah, mainly ayahuasca, I believe. And so in this documentary, which I just happened upon, and had never heard of DMT before, I didn't really have any personal experience with psychedelics. And in this film, he talked a lot about meditation as well, and how the two, are very sort of have this symbiotic relationship, and that got me very interested. And so through that, and just kind of reading about it, I found MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and it's an organization out in California that sponsors studies using psychedelics, using psilocybin, marijuana, MDMA. And, I got on their mailing list, and then, I don't know, a year or two went by, and I got an email saying they were having a presentation here in New Orleans on this, the results of this study that they were doing with MDMA. And it's MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. And I went to that, and they talked about the results, and it was just astounding. But they showed this video of a veteran that was on MDMA, and during his session, sort of the things that were happening for him, he was having these insights about himself that I had never seen in traditional psychotherapy. And you could just see his inner healer was, I really believe that the body, it has a way of healing itself, just like, if we were to, get a cut on our arm or something, the body moves towards healing. And I think that the psyche can do that if given the opportunity. And I just saw that, it was coming from this place deep within him, and the therapists were just holding space for that. But he was doing the healing.
Right.
And I mean, it gives me chills still just talking about it.
I mean, so, back to kind of when we were starting the conversations talking about pharmaceuticals, and I say this having been on pharmaceuticals before in my life. So it's not that there's a judgment placed on them from a place of trial and error, but from my experience, when I think I was in college, and I was experiencing anxiety when I was driving. So I had a difficult time driving on campuses. I was constantly panicked that I was going to hit someone. And so I don't even know who gave me the prescription. I think it was Lexapro, maybe. And I just started taking it without even thinking. No one talked to me about it. No one said, these are the implications. This is what you may experience. Also, from my perspective now, I know there was a lot of hormonal imbalance at that time. There was no nutrition. There were many factors that, from my perspective now, I see, oh, wow, like there are so many tools that I could have utilized to lower my anxiety, natural ways, natural methods, without all the side effects. And something inside me just had me stop abruptly, and which was fine. I guess the dosage wasn't high enough and the time in which I was on them wasn't high enough. But again, my perspective of that time was that we're trying to fit a soul being into the constructs of what our society deemed to be appropriate and acceptable. So if you're not functioning well between the hours of 9 and 5, if you're not studying late night like everyone else, if you're not wanting to party like everyone else, if you, don't say the right things, don't feel the same type of connection to people, then there's something wrong with you. And I think a lot of my college experience was recognizing, like, I don't fit into this mold, and figuring out different ways to cope, I guess, because there wasn't a lot of information on the outside saying that individuality is actually my fire, my essence, my everything. Don't dim it. Let's go into it. But nonetheless, like moving into the conversation of psychedelics, my experience with psychedelics is that essence, that being, that soul is given a chance to breathe. Mm-hmm. And I think that the connection that you saw in that documentary too is that feeling is the same when you meditate and you connect to yourself, and when you are on psychedelics and you connect to yourself so deeply. But it brings up so many questions because, like, how is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is it happening through these chemicals? Through these compounds, through these herbs and drugs? And then also, why are we so afraid? Why are we so afraid of something that in many instances comes from the ground? Like we sell condensed herbs all day, every day, condensed nutrients all day, every day. And that's totally fine. And certainly that changes us chemically. Why are we sort of so resistant to that, which is expanding? It seems to be expanding something spiritual inside of us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear. And we've just been conditioned we've sort of been taught that, these things are drugs and they're bad. There are a lot of drugs that we probably use every day, like caffeine or, food in different ways. But we've sort of been taught that that's okay. And, these other types of substances are put in this other category. But I think there's also some fear about tapping into our subconscious, like just the not really knowing what you're going to find there, and so that sort of a fear of the unknown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that process is scary. Yeah. When your reality is totally flipped upside down, and you don't know who you are, and you don't know what you want, and you don't know what you're doing here. Of course that's scary. But how can we be in this life experience, which is so much more than this body? Hopefully we're all on the same page at this point in recognizing that, like, we're not just this.
Yeah. Right?
But the question of what is beyond is so, I guess, controversial in many ways. But, and also I think that from the beginning, right, there was a lot of momentum towards this being dangerous. So are there legitimate points to psychedelics being dangerous as well?
Yeah, I think just like with anything else, if you're in an environment that isn't safe, or you take too much, or but I think, relative to anything else, I feel like that, a lot of them are pretty safe. And so that's what we're kind of going through now with the FDA is just trying to gather safety data, and that's why MAPS is sponsoring studies with psilocybin and MDMA, and we're about to move into phase 3 of this study, MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, and the results so far are remarkable. And PTSD, and I think that we're looking specifically at PTSD right now because there has to be some parameters for this study, but most people have experienced trauma in some way in their life, and it leads to problems that we all kind of deal with. And so if there's something that can help us to take a look at that and maybe heal it in some way, that's hugely beneficial.
No shit. Let's jump on that train. I heard you were one of the participants in getting Dennis McKenna to come to New Orleans to talk about his new movie, and also to give a talk on kind of his research up until now. And one of the things that I remember him saying and alluding to was that he foresees psilocybin, which is the effective component of magic mushrooms, being used in end-of-life therapy for people who are about to die, because it gives them that sense of ease in dealing with their own mortality, and then potentially having those conversations with their family members, and just creating a beautiful environment and experience for those who are about to die, which is great. And you're so sweet when you're talking about the research and everything that you're doing with MAPS. But in my mind, I'm just like, this should be available for everyone, because everyone is traumatized from something.
Yeah.
No, even if you had the perfect childhood, someone left you crying for too long, you didn't get the toy that you wanted, someone on the playground told you were fat, like whatever it was, there's something in every single person. So for us to say, like, only those who have like this defined piece of trauma are the ones who should be, it to me is very frustrating, because I feel like the tools should be available. People drink themselves to death every day. Alcohol is available. One of the most toxic. I've done a lot of research on psilocybin, and I know that its toxicity level is almost zero, which is obviously why they're thinking about giving it to people who are nearing the end of their life, who are obviously very fragile. So,
and it's being studied with addiction, alcoholism,
everything.
Yeah.
Everything. And so why do you think that psychedelics in such a large form are being used to treat such a wide range of, in my opinion, it could be used to treat everything, because maybe the answer is what you might experience on the psychedelics.
Yeah, I think, back in the 70s, these things were legal and they were used in psychiatry. And I think, they're because of the Vietnam War, and they started to become associated with the counterculture. And then there was the war on drugs, and they've just sort of been demonized. And it's sort of, so now we're having to work against all of that to try to get them out of that, that stigma kind of that they're in right now. But it's sort of, I think, just baby steps. We have to use them in these sort of defined ways right now. But just like, for example, for PTSD, the only FDA-approved drugs that are FDA-approved to treat PTSD are Zoloft and Paxil. But there are a lot of other drugs that are prescribed for that, off-label is what it's called. And so once I think we can move MDMA and psilocybin from a Schedule 1, which means Schedule 1 means that there's no medicinal value, that there could be a potential for abuse, these things that just don't really apply to psilocybin and MDMA. So once they can get moved to a Schedule 2, then, hopefully they'll be able to be used for other
Is
new things
marijuana
too.
also considered Schedule 1?
Yeah. I mean, it's legal for, like, here in Louisiana. It's legal for medicinal purposes, I guess. But the problem is, getting it, because, even if your doctor thinks that it's appropriate for you, there's really no
Route.
place for you to obtain it. So it's still a problem, but I think we're hopefully moving in the right direction.
How does the medical industry, or is MAPS sort of a medical arm? Are they breaking down the studies in sort of a medical way to be applied ideally in the medical field?
Well, they're the sponsor of these studies, which means it's a nonprofit. They raise money, and unfortunately, these drugs, the patents. I mean, there's really not a way to make money on them, so there's no incentive for drug companies to look at them for I mean, there's no incentive for them to spend a lot of money. It's very expensive to do research, and
in one treatment, you may be done.
Right. Yeah. So it's not going to be a huge moneymaker.
Right.
Yeah. So MAPS sponsors, the research, and it works with, the FDA to, get these sort of the parameters of the research. So we have, a protocol with the MDMA research that we go by, and, it's it's monitored. We're monitored by the DEA, and it's quite a strict and intense protocol. But it's I think Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, had the insight to he saw that this was going to be the route to go. Like, you have to change the policy, and through scientific data showing that this is beneficial, it's safe. It really helps people. Then you can, change the policy. So
are you actually administering the drug and watching people, holding space for them, and then you have someone watching you watch your patient? Okay.
Yeah. So with this study right now, we have about 18 visits. So there's a lot of preparatory work, and then we give the MDMA 3 times a month in between each time. And so we give the medicine, and for 8 hours, there's a male and a female therapist. We have 2 therapy teams here. So myself and Ray Worthy and Mark Skelly and Zoe Hipple, we're the 4 therapists. And so there's a therapy team. We sit with the person for about 8 hours while the medicine is taking effect. And, it's a totally different way of doing therapy, because we're really just holding space and allowing their inner healer to bring up what they need, and it does. And it's just the most remarkable thing to watch and to be part of. And then, in between each session, we have integrative sessions where we meet and discuss sort of what, how they can apply that to their life, what came up and how they feel about it, and then getting ready for the next session. And then we have independent raters that are psychologists that give the person a test called the CAPS, which is the clinician administered PTSD scale. And that's sort of the gold standard for measuring PTSD. And so we look at that,
How it changes throughout the process.
Yeah.
What are you saying as the change?
That most of the people no longer meet the criteria for PTSD.
And these are people who have been dealing with
these symptoms for often, many years. And what PTSD, it's with trauma, often it's very difficult to work in traditional psychotherapy with people because they have trouble talking about their trauma. And MDMA is like the perfect drug for that because of the way it works in the brain. It decreases the response in the amygdala, which is sort of the fear response, and then it increases what's happening in the frontal lobe, which is sort of the reasoning, decision-making part of the brain. And so they're able to talk about their trauma, without
Fear.
getting the emotional
Judgment.
response that they typically get, that they're, that's so awful that they just don't go there.
Is MDMA and the way that it works in the brain very different from other psychedelics?
There's not really any, sort of a visual and auditory sort of effects like there can be with some of the others. I don't even know that it's really considered a psychedelic, but it's in kind of that realm of sort of grouped in that realm with the others because it got moved to a Schedule I drug. And but yeah, psilocybin, I think, and DMT are different in the way that you sort of perceive things, and you can even have some kind of hallucinations and have the experience. Almost like dreaming is the way I think of it. It's a very real experience, but you're seeing and hearing and kind of experiencing things that aren't kind of what everyone else is experiencing right now.
Yeah. My experience with psilocybin, with mushrooms, was just that. I mean, I think that I could talk about one experience for the rest of my life. I could probably break it down, unpack it, talk about the relevance to my life now, talk about the relevance to my future life, talk about things that were healing inside of me physically. I think that I truly could talk about one psilocybin experience for the rest of my life because it's so encompassing, like a dream. And I think that was such a good comparison because also since having the psilocybin experiences, the relevance of my dreams feel increased.
I'd love to hear about your experience.
Life. Oh my gosh. So if I had to just kind of condense the impact of my psilocybin experience, it would be, by the way, alleged experience, and whatever. I can't make it legal, so whatever it is, it's going to be. But the experience, to me, I've done a lot of meditation, I've done a lot of yoga, was very connected to that place where the insight that comes subtly, naturally through the experience of meditation was coming through so profoundly. And I was doing the mushroom with someone else. And the very interesting part of that was that I could gain insight for myself, and that insight was connected to that other person's insight as well. So it was as though we were both connecting to the same thing, and the information was being downloaded and integrated into us very individually. For me, what happens is there seems to be a lot of information just given, flooding through, coming through in visions and through sacred geometry, things varying from serpents and ancient Egyptian information to the flower of life and things like that. And then moving into sort of an experience of the environment around me. So the trees will begin to move in a particular way. They will look a particular color, which is a little bit more vibrant. The earth will feel very alive. The ambient sounds will become more rhythmic in nature and almost healing in nature. And so there's that very beautiful, sense of just oneness, and looking at people around me, seeing, it seemed that I could see the separateness in our level of capacity to express our consciousness into the world. It seemed that I could see a difference and variances there, which didn't feel like fear. It felt like an opportunity to continue doing what I'm doing. Motivation for the path that I'm on, and experiencing that first within myself. And then, honestly, there were very fearful aspects as well, very scary aspects of the experience as well, which brought me through things that I fear on a regular basis, like my safety. Like, it was almost showing me all the unnecessary fear and trauma that I put my physical body through just in any given day. If I saw like a police officer, I recognized, wow, I have a physical response to seeing a police officer because I'm afraid that, my safety or my freedom is going to be taken away. So showing me that, while I couldn't really do anything with the information at the time, I recognized that all of that fear was actually moving through me and changing the way that fear then operated outside of that experience. So the fear was actually reduced in a lot of ways. The connection and the insight that I was getting about all of that was so much my own, like, channeling and information, that it gave me more confidence in connecting to that outside of that experience as well. And seeing how that plays out in my dreams, seeing how that plays out in intuition and thoughts. And then also I've recognized that I've for a long time, and I've talked about this on the podcast a lot, I've had irregular periods for a long, long time. And every time I've done mushrooms, my period what has needed to happen actually happened the next day, whether I needed to start a period or stop a period. So there were physical implications I felt of going through those emotions of fear or anxiety through that experience, because it was actually like using my intuition and my consciousness to work through something that I guess I'm locking into my body.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And that's just a blink of the experience. It's so much bigger and so much more. And of course, right after I did it, I was like, my mom needs to do this, my sister needs to do this. And then really actually integrating, coming, back into my groundedness a little bit, I recognized it's working with all of the other things that I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I'm ready to have uncomfortable conversations in my life in order to work towards the relationships that I want.
Yeah.
And the businesses that I want and things like that. But without that, and without the information coming from people like you, people like Dennis McKenna, people like Joe Rogan is a great influencer for me, Aubrey Marcus, a lot of the people who are talking about this way of living in conjunction with nutrition, there are so many factors I feel are important. So I definitely wouldn't say that it's a one-stop shop. It doesn't fix everything, but anything that can connect one to one's own soul and spirituality, I feel like the healing, there's no way that we could put a label on the amount of healing that can take place. It can be actually anything. And I'm sure that you've seen that in the trials.
Yeah. And with my own experience, and I think there's so many things that shape that just happen throughout our life that we're not even really aware of, that sort of on this subconscious level. I'll just give you an example. When I went to and had my MDMA session, I didn't really have anything specific that I wanted. I've just done a lot of personal work, so I didn't really know what I was going to be working with. And what came up for me was it was so interesting because I didn't even realize that it was an issue. And so I was raised in the Mormon church, and my family's very religious. And that was what most of my session was about, how there was a lot of conditioning that happened through being raised that way that I've had to sort of undo over the years. And I saw how it has sort of made me not trust myself throughout my life, not trust my intuition, because I was sort of raised with being told, that if you think this way, or if if this, if you do this, then you're a bad person. And so, I didn't trust sort of my own, like inner guide, and how that has affected me, throughout my life has really been profound. And one of the things that came up for me during that session was trust yourself. And it was so healing and so powerful. And I mean, some of these experiences also, the ayahuasca ceremony, these experiences have completely changed my life. Like they say, these experiences, it's like having 20 years of therapy in a couple hours.
And you're saying that from having been a therapist for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this whole kind of realm of psychiatry has given me a new passion about it, where I was getting a little, burnt out and discouraged by not seeing, it's the steps that you kind of make in traditional psychotherapy, or they can be pretty small and quite slow, and it can be a little discouraging. But some of these changes that I'm seeing with the psychedelics, it's remarkable, and it's coming from the person's inner healer, which is
right.
It's not some outside person sort of telling them anything,
Mm-hmm.
Which makes it better.
But having someone like you there, I can imagine it's like you're in this room and you're interacting with your deepest, darkest fears in conjunction with seeing perhaps your greatest dreams, and also seeing your potential, and then having someone there to remind you that it's not false, that it's yours, and it's possible, and it's and so you're an encouraging addition to someone who may not have ever had that in their life, or maybe does have that, but maybe the rawness or the authenticity of what's coming out never has. And so, yeah, it's just like reading all of these self-help books, reading all these business books, and, getting to like the nut of issues, or like the nut of your dream. You have to get through so much shit to get there. And you often don't, because you're judging yourself the whole way along the route.
Yeah.
And then, so to have that part exposed, that seed exposed, and then to have someone say, yes, that's real, that's true, that's you, that's possible, that's, that can be a part of your world. How incredibly powerful. I can't even, I do believe that having a guide and having a support is incredibly important. And it's unfortunate that if you do find yourself being able to access some of these things, you maybe don't have a therapist that's going to sit there with you for 6 hours while you're tripping.
Yeah.
And know how to hold space and say, yes, this is authentic and true.
Yeah, it's really important. And a lot of people are hearing about ayahuasca ceremonies, and you can go to these places where it's legal, and even psilocybin, you can go, there's retreat centers in places like Jamaica where it's legal. And people are craving that, but then that leads to, places that maybe, don't have the best intentions, and you have to be very careful because you're right. It's really important. The set and the setting, it's hugely important in these experiences. You have to feel safe and be safe.
Right. What was your ayahuasca retreat like?
It was in Ecuador at a place called Gaia Sagrada, and there were 27 people in our group from around the world, and it was a 12-day retreat with several ceremonies. And there was fear for me going into that because I didn't know what would come. You are sort of fearful of, is there something that I don't know about in my subconscious that's going to, that maybe should stay in my subconscious, that doesn't, I don't want to deal with it.
Or that could harm me the rest of my life.
Yeah. So there's that. And, but I was sort of at the point that I just wanted the truth. And I'd seen, through meditation, I'd had experiences on the Vipassana retreat of just this deep connection to the planet. And, like you said, just the oneness and really feeling and knowing that. And there's something just life-changing about that. And I experienced a similar things with ayahuasca, but it's, just sort of like this teacher, that really looks within and sees what you need to work with. And so there were just so many things like patience and, seeing my family in different ways. It really, I feel like helped our relationship. So yeah, it was so beneficial for me. Where I grew up, psychedelics, I remember sort of hearing about LSD and mushrooms, but I always thought that they were, just very dangerous and that you could go crazy or go jump off a building. And so I had no desire ever to do any of that, sort of came from that time period, I guess, where it wasn't really that prevalent or popular in where I grew up. So didn't have much experience with it.
The sense of being able to deal with what you're dealing with in your life better, it feels like it's because it reconnects you to truth and authenticity. And when you're connected to truth and love, there's no separateness. So you recognize that, yes, it's frustrating that my brother, my sister, my mom, is trapped in this mindset, but you also then can see it from this perspective of understanding that they're in their journey and experience as well. And it's totally fine. And there are many people on their own routes and it looks many different crazy ways. But when you experience unconditional love for yourself, which I feel like a lot of these psychedelic experiences are that unconditional self-love. When you experience that for yourself and give that to yourself, you're so much more willing to give it to someone else and say, you may look this particular way or do this particular thing, but none of it matters. It's just an expression of your learning through this lifetime. And so I will love you despite. It becomes so, like, all of those situations become so much less intense, I feel.
Yeah, I agree. And the thought of hurting someone else or the planet is as foreign as, hurting yourself. Because you see all of these things as yourself. And, it's really changed the way that my behaviors, and just really wanting to take care of this earth. And, it provides life for us. And I think when you have the experience of really being in tune with it and almost like having a communication with the earth, it just makes you want to take care of it. And, I wish everyone could have these experiences. We'd no longer, have wars and would solve a
So
lot of
many
problems.
things.
Yeah.
As long as they were in the right environment with the right person, allowing them to express what they were feeling. So going back into your everyday life as a therapist, is it like every single person that comes in, or are you just like, shit, if I could just give you something and just allow you to experience this process, we could get somewhere?
That is sort of the frustration. So I'm so lucky that I get to be part of this research because I get to do it legally, and it's very rewarding, and it's what I hope to eventually be able to do all of the time.
Yeah. But maybe it also makes you more creative in the moment of not being able to use it, because where you're trying to get.
And there are a lot of ways to experience altered states of consciousness too, through dance and meditation and chanting, and breathing is a huge one. So
Are you talking about a particular type of breath work?
Holotropic breath work was developed by a psychiatrist named Stan Groff, and he actually used to give LSD to his patients and do psychotherapy with them, and did that legally, for years. And then when it became illegal, he sort of wanted to develop a way to get people in